Hello everyone, Debris here with ActionVFX. In this tutorial, we will learn how to composite large-scale gas explosion in Adobe After Effects. To do this shot, we will be using several ActionVFX collections, such as large-scale gas explosions, exploding debris Volume 2, dust waves Volume 2, and atmospheric smoke and fog Volume 2. On our large-scale gas explosion collection, we provide two file formats that you can purchase: the ProRes MOV file version in both 2K and 4K, and the 4K only openEXR version that contains the multiple render passes of the explosion. In this tutorial, I will first cover how to do this shot using our MOV file version, and then after that, I'm going to show you how to achieve some more advanced compositing tricks that can only be done using the EXR version of the element. We have a lot to cover in this tutorial, so without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so this is our composition. Here we have our three sets of layers: the background plate, and then the duplicate of the plate where I masked out this rock in the middle, and the other is our pre-comp layer of our actor here. So if we go inside of this pre-comp, you will see that I have my plate of the actor here on a green screen. And here we have a matte layer of the green screen that I have rendered. And then I luma matte the green screen plate to the matte. And then I pre-comp these two together, and then I added some extra effects to clean up the mask a bit. I'm not going to talk about this part because this tutorial will focus on the explosion effects, but if you want to follow along, feel free to download the project files and the After Effects project of what I have here in the description below. Now we want to add our explosion behind our foreground actor and the midground rock here. So let's lock them so we don't accidentally select these two layers while playing with our explosion elements. And then let's look at our footage. Here we can see that our guy is looking at something falling from the sky and then explode. So this is where we want our explosion to appear. So let's add a marker on this time. Okay, let's bring in our explosion. Let's bring this 2K MOV file of explosion front number 1, put it under the guy and the midground rock. And then let's position it to the frame. And also let's time it on the timeline. Then let's select the pen behind tool and let's move the location of our anchor point to the base of the explosion. That way we can scale our explosion right from that point. And that was the tutorial on how to... No, I'm just kidding. We still have a lot to do. So now that we have our explosion, first let's make the shadow. Because as you can see from the plate, we have the sunlight from the right side of the plate. So let's duplicate our explosion layer and let's name it Explosion Shadow Matte. Put it below our main explosion, and then let's click toggle switch and turn the shadow matte to 3D. And then let's rotate it so it falls to this hill. So this will be the shape of our shadow. Now let's disable our main explosion for a second and let's create a mask on the shadow matte based on the shape of the hill. And feather it a bit. Now let's turn our explosion back on, and then let's add fast blur to our shadow matte. Next, create an adjustment layer and name it Explosion Shadow, and then put it below the matte, and then toggle switch again, and let's alpha matte our adjustment layer to the matte. And then let's bring in curve to the adjustment layer, and then you want to look at the shadow area of the plate, like under this rock here, and we want to mimic this type of warm shadow color. So let's go to the curve and let's reduce the brightness by a lot. And then let's switch to the blue channel and reduce the highlight of the blue just a little bit and increase the red just a little. Next, let's add some color correction to the explosion itself. I want to match the dark color of the smoke to the dark color of the shadowy area of the watch here. So let's add some curve, let's lift the dark area just a little bit, and then reduce the midtones just a touch. And then maybe just add a little bit of red on the shadows. And then let's add a hue and saturation and reduce the saturation quite a bit to follow the washed out look of the plate. And perfect. Next, we're going to add chunks of debris exploding out of the ground. So I want to select this beauty render of exploding debris number 9 along with its shadow, and then bring them to a new composition. Make sure that it's single comp and uncheck the sequence layer. Then let's rename the composition to debris. And here, if we toggle the transparency, we can see that we have our debris layer and its shadow. So this is what we want. Next, we're going to go back to the main composition and drag in the debris comp that we just made on top of our explosion. And then we are going to move the anchor point of the debris to the center again so we can scale it up from the center. Okay, so let's fix the timing of our debris. We don't want the concrete block at the beginning of our debris here, so we can just trim those first few frames. And now, our debris is currently going too slow. Also, it disappears right at the end of its duration. So let's fix that. So right click on our timeline panel and let's bring in our time stretch column. And then let's speed this debris up to 65%. And then right click on the debris and on time, select the freeze on last frame. This way our debris won't disappear after its duration is over. And then let's add Gaussian blur to blur it up for 2 pixels. Great, now let's color correct our debris. We can do our color correction on our main composition here, but the problem is our debris composition contained 2 layers, which is the debris and the shadow on the ground. And we want to color correct them separately. So we want to color correct the debris from inside of its own pre-composition without the need to go back and forth to the main comp. We can do that by locking the window of our main comp here, and then let's get inside our debris comp and it will create a new window. So let's move that window to the side, and now we have a live look of 2 composition, which is our main composition and our debris composition at the same time. Okay, so now let's get curve on our debris beauty layer and let's brighten up our midtones. So what we want to do is we want to make our debris to match with our ground. So let's get a tint and let's select the black color to a dark area of the ground. And then for the white color, let's select a bright area of the ground. And there we go. We have automatically made our debris a little bit more blended in. But currently, it's blending in way too much that it looks a bit weird. So let's reduce the tint amount, that way we can get some of our dark color back. And then let's add curve again and darken it back a little bit more. Because the debris is supposed to look like it got burned up by the explosion. Next, let's select our debris shadow. Because this shadow is not going to be super visible in the shot, we don't have to do some fancy color correction. So let's just reduce the opacity to around 60%. Okay, so we are done with our debris. Now let's disable our window lock. And then back in our main comp, let's see what we have so far. Nice. One thing that is very noticeable, of course, is the lack of motion blur, which we can add using the pixel motion blur. However, the pixel motion blur would slow down our composition, so we are going to save this for the very end. Next, I want to add some leftover smoke to merge the debris and the explosion a little bit more. So let's drag in this lingering fog asset, and then I want to remove the black background. Usually when removing a black background from a shot, you would use add or screen blending modes. However, we don't want to do that, because using that blending modes would cause the value of our debris to brighten up the background. We just want to remove the black values of our footage without adding color to the back. So go to the effects panel and type in unmold. Here we have a native After Effects unmold preset for removing the black background. So what's happening here is the preset contains a shift channel that is using the brightness of our smoke as alpha channel. And then we have remove color matting that clean up the leftover darkness from the smoke. Okay, so now let's add fractal noise and increase the brightness to around 20 to add a little bit of texture to our fog. Then add curve and let's switch to alpha and increase the alpha midtones a little bit to push the opaqueness of our smoke a bit more. And then let's add curve again and reduce the highlights to make it dark and also the blue. Now we're going to scale this down and position it on the top of our debris. Great, so now what we're going to do is we want to animate the opacity of this fog to make it fade in after the explosion happens. Now we are going to add some dust wave. So let's drag in this dust front number 6 in front of our fog, and then we are going to add the unmold preset again. And then let's position our dust to kick off from the explosion. Great! Now let's add a tint to our dust wave. Select the white color of the ground just like before, and the dark color to the dark color of the plate. And let's reduce the tint amount just a little bit. And then we are going to add curve and reduce the midtones on the blue channel and the green channel just a little bit. And then we want to lower the opacity of the dust just a touch. So here we can see that the dust is going a little bit early and also a little bit slow. So let's speed this up. So let's click on the dust time stretch and speed it up to 32%. And then let's position the timing to be around the same time as the explosion. And perfect. Next, we are going to add another layer of dust wave. This one, I'm going to put it in front of the mid-ground rock layer, but still behind the actor. And then let's copy the effects that we had from the previous dust and paste it to this one. And then let's time stretch it and make it 10%. So we're going to make it really fast. And then let's position our timeline because we want this dust to begin right after the first dust kicks off. So here we can see that the beginning of this dust is a little bit too sudden. Also, we have this dust disappear after its duration is finished. So what I want to do is to fade in the opacity in the beginning and fade it out at the end. Next, we want to add this dust coming at the camera footage. So let's add that on top of our other dusts. Copy paste the effects from the previous one again. And then let's time this right after the previous dust. Now I want to simulate this dust to pass through from behind our actor to the front and hit the camera. And to do that, we are going to duplicate the dust. And then put the duplicate in front of our guy. And then we want the dust at the bottom to be trimmed. And then have the dust on top to appear after that. And now we have this. We have the dust on the back and then it would switch to the front. However, currently the switch is a bit too sudden. So we want to overlap the duration of the top and bottom dusts. And then we want to animate the opacity and make the bottom one fade out at the end. And then at the same time, the top one fades in. And now we can see the dust smoothly transition from the back of our actor to the front. Okay, so now we are going to add the missile smoke trail on the beginning of the shot. So here we have our actor looking up, and we can imagine that the smoke trail to go from the top left of the shot and then it hits the ground and explode. So to do that, instead of creating a particle system to do the smoke trail, we are just going to grab an explosion like this explosion number 7 here and put it into a new comp. And here, if we scrub through the timeline, you will see that we have a bunch of smoke trails coming out of the explosion. So now we are going to select our pen tool and let's grab one of them. Now let's scale it up and flip it and then rotate it. Now let's rename this composition to something like smoke trail, and then we're gonna go back to our main composition and drag in our smoke trail comp that we just made, and let's put it below our main explosion layer. And then let's position our smoke trail here to go from the top left to the explosion. Awesome. So now what we're going to do is we are going to animate the smoke trail coming in. So let's get the pen tool again and draw a mask around the smoke trail. And then let's add some feather. And then I just want to animate the mask path to make the smoke trail go from the sky to the ground. Okay, and then let's animate the opacity to make it fade out after the smoke hits the ground. And there we go, creating a very simple smoke trail effects. Okay, so that was compositing our explosion using the MOV file. However, we are not done yet. As I mentioned early in the tutorial, we have the 2K MOV file version of this explosion element as well as the 4K openEXR version. The openEXR or EXR files contain different render passes of the explosions that we can use to do a more detailed adjustments to the elements. And I will show you how to use some of those render passes to enhance our shot. If you want to follow along this part, we have provided one EXR frame of the explosion that you can download for free in the description below. So let's go to our main explosion layer and let's pre-compose it and leave all attributes. Okay, and now inside our explosion pre-comp, let's disable our 2K MOV file, and then on the project window, let's select our EXR image sequence, and then we're going to right click on that image sequence and interpret footage and make sure that it is running on 23.976 frame per second, which is the frame rate of the MOV file. And then let's drag the EXR version to the composition, and there we go. Now the EXR is bigger than the 2K MOV file, so let's right click and fit the size to comp. And there we go, we have the explosion look exactly the same as before. So now let's rename this base layer, and then let's add extractor. And now our color is messed up a bit because we are not in a linear color space, so get color profile converter and check on linearize input to fix it. Okay, so here on our extractor, we see that we have many different passes of our explosion. So what I want to do is to use some of these passes to improve our lighting in more detail. So before we begin, we want to make sure to click unmold on our extractor here. So now we have all the hidden pixels that was cut out by the alpha channel unfurled. And then let's add shift channel, and we're going to change the alpha to full on. This basically removes the transparent background of our explosion. This is to make sure that we get to access all the RGB information of our layer before it is being cut out back by the alpha channel. So now let's duplicate our EXR, and we are going to name this duplicate rim matte. And then on the extractor, let's select the rim light pass. And now we have this pass of the explosion being lit on the edges. So I'm going to use this edge light to create a quick light wrap. So let's go back to our main comp and copy our backplate and then paste it in the explosion pre-comp. And then we are going to position the backplate to where the explosion was in the main composition. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to add fast blur and increase it a lot. And then let's put this backplate behind our rim matte, and then let's luma matte it toward the matte. Now let's turn the blending mode of our plate to add, and this is what we have, a quick fake light wrap. Next, let's create a bit more highlight from the right side of the screen, because that is where we have our light source. So let's duplicate the EXR again, let's turn it on, and then let's pull the main light pass, and then we're going to create an adjustment layer. And we are going to luma matte the adjustment layer to this main matte. And then we are going to add curve to the adjustment layer, and let's increase the brightness a little bit. Next, I'm going to duplicate again, and we are going to pull the fire mask and create an adjustment layer again and luma matte it. And then let's add exposure and increase it a touch because I want the fire to have a very visible hotspot. And now we have fixed up our explosion using the EXR files. Now, we're gonna go back to the main comp. And this is what we have. We have the explosion with the solid dark background. So the reason for this is because we have removed the alpha matte from before and we haven't brought it back. So let's go back to the pre-comp again. And then we are going to duplicate one of our EXR, put it on top, and we're going to delete all the effects. And then on the blending mode, let's change it to stencil alpha. So now we have our explosion being masked by the alpha channel of the very top layer. Now, of course, this whole time we were doing our EXR without seeing what it looked like in the final composition. So let's lock the window of the main composition, and then let's go back to the pre-comp. And now we can adjust our EXR while still looking at the final composition. Okay, so everything's looking great and we are practically finished with our compositing. Now, of course, like I mentioned, to really sell the realism a little bit more, we need to add motion blur to our elements. So let's just add pixel motion blur on all of our elements. And then I'm going to add some camera blur. And then let's add some color grading, some camera shake, and even more explosions on the background. And that was our shot. Our large-scale gas explosions collection also provides the footage in different camera angles. And they are all available in both MOV and EXR versions, which you can purchase anytime on our website at ActionVFX.com. At ActionVFX, we provide high-quality VFX assets for your VFX needs. We have fire, explosions, energy, and many others. You can also sign up for our ActionVFX subscription starting at the low cost of $14.99 a month. This is the most affordable way to access our library, and you can cancel anytime, no contract. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comment section below what kind of tutorials that you'd like to see next. And see you next time. Bye bye.